Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about student-parent relations. Christine Schelhas-Miller is co-author of Don't Tell Me What to Do, Just Send Money, and Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Studies at Cornell University's College of Human Ecology. Chrissy is a graduate of Bucknell University and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. James McDaniel is headmaster of Linden Hill School, a Massachusetts school for boys with language-based learning differences. Jim has been Linden Hill's headmaster for over 8 years and is a graduate of Hamilton College and Teachers College at Columbia University. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Well, all right. Well, if we can start with you, Chrissy.
Sure.
I love the title of your book. Would you mind explaining how this book came about in terms of the title and how the book came about?
Well, the title came about because we wanted a title that would be meaningful to the parents of college students. And nothing is more meaningful, I don't think, than your student repeatedly saying to you, "Don't tell me what to do, just send money." So we wanted it to leap off the shelves into their hands, and it has.
That's terrific. And Jim, I assume you've never met a student who said something like that to you?
Not quite at our age, Stephen, no. But I've had a couple boys go through college, so I know that phrase.
Fair enough. And Jim, can you explain a little bit about the school that you run?
Linden Hill School is the oldest junior boarding school for boys with learning differences. It's in Northfield, Massachusetts. We're dealing with, language differences, dyslexia, attention deficit.
And what are some other language differences that one would have besides dyslexia?
Well, it's a wide band, dyslexia, and what we're dealing with is either on the receptive end, decoding and breaking down language, or on the expressive end, working on getting the thoughts out of your head through your fingers onto the page, or typing. So we're really dealing pretty exclusively with either receptive or expressive language. We obviously have some executive functioning, I'm sure you know, Chrissy, and issues of organization as well.
And maybe if I could ask both of you about these issues of organization and how parents come in terms of helping kids, in terms of, you're dealing with slightly younger kids, Chrissy, than you're dealing with, but maybe you can both speak to the issues, if you don't mind, of how you deal with these issues and how parents are involved in that.
Well, I can talk about how college parents are becoming increasingly involved in helping their kids with organizational issues, mainly because of electronic communication. And they can be in touch with their kids 24/7. They can call them to wake them up in the morning. They can remind them when they have papers due, when they have exams. So we have seen a big change in the last 10 years since my book came out. In fact, I'll say that...
Sure, let's start with the commercial.
We'll start with the commercial. With the original edition of the book, which came out in 2000, you will see, has a parent with a phone cord. The new edition, which is coming out on July 5th, has a parent and a student texting one another. And in a nutshell, that is the big change that we have seen in parent-student communication, that parents can and their kids can be in touch with each other 24/7. So they can truly organize their kids' lives, which we do not recommend. But we'll come to that later.
Fair enough. And Jim, how do kids deal with their parents when they're at Linden Hill?
Well, Boy, it has changed an awful lot. I've been doing the same age group, not the same school, since '79. But at Linden Hill, what we see is the parents are coming to us having gone through a stretch where things have been pretty dysfunctional very often at home before they find us. So they've gotten to that point where the tension's pretty high. So when they get to us, there is a period where they let go. And so the communication is an important piece of partnering with the parent and helping together keep, in our case, boys organized. But their day-to-day isn't probably as much as you would think. The boys are emailing home and letting them know they're okay, and they're also calling home really only once a week. So that's, a control that we have with the age group. that I think probably helps us a great deal with that. But again, I go back to what they're coming from, so it makes a lot of sense to help us work our system with the boys to get them into the structure and the flow of our program.
Sure. And what about parents of the boys? Do they call regularly and you say, well, it may be healthier, Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jones, if we have 2 days alone with somebody?
Right. We have advisors for each boy, and an advisor is to be that constant contact person, if you will, for the family. So there's always someone who's right there who each teacher has only 1 or 2 advisees. So that is quite a specific assignment, and they can really know everything about that child, whether it's they need a new pair of galoshes to they need a baseball bat for the season coming up. And they'll take care of that as well as any emotional or academic issues that come up. So there's a lot of communication that goes on with that point person, and I have put in place a much more elaborate communication system since I've been there, again, with the evolution of expectations and the evolution of communication that really has ratcheted up those expectations because it's so easy and becoming ubiquitous with our everyday existence.
Fair enough. And Chrissy, I know that you were a residential advisor at one point at Cornell. You must have faced some of these same issues.
Absolutely. But ratcheting it up is, I think, the way to put it. In the past 10 to 20 years, certainly the past 10 years, there's been a dramatic change in how involved parents expect to be. And in fact, the main message of our book is that when your child is a college student, you should change your role from being a supervisor to directly managing your kid's life to being a consultant and providing guidance and coaching, but not managing the day-to-day life.
But how would that work if I am a mom or a dad and I am accustomed to being in constant touch with my student, and now all of a sudden my student goes off to college, whether it's Cornell or somewhere else? Why would that change? Why would I have an expectation that that would change?
Because your child is in a different stage of life. Your child is in what we call emerging adulthood.
No, I'm not questioning whether or not that they should do it, but I'm talking about the expectation. Wouldn't I have an expectation that that would continue?
Okay, well, I think it's related to whether you should do it, because when your child walks across the stage for commencement, you want your child to be independent and or interdependent and be able to function as an adult and manage their own life, be responsible for their own behavior, make their own decisions, deal with the consequences. And if you are managing their life all through college, they are not going to be that person when they graduate.
So basically you're saying, if I hear you correctly, that even if a parent had that expectation, you would advise them to not have that expectation or to change that expectation? Absolutely.
I would advise them to change it for the good of the development of their child. That you want to do developmentally appropriate things for your children, and as they reach what we now call emerging adulthood, or what some psychologists have proposed is emerging adulthood, age 18 to 25 or even 30, where you want the 2 big developmental tasks are figuring out who they are, developing an identity, and being able to autonomously make decisions and run their lives.
But that's got to be hard, though, if you think about it.
I have 2 students in college, and not only do I have to think about it, I can feel about it. I know how emotionally laden it is to stop yourself from giving advice. It's very hard. But if you think about the long-term goal and how you want your child to end up being an adult and managing their own life, then it makes it still very difficult, but you can make yourself do it.
What about a student with a learning difficulty who now perhaps went to Linden Hill and then somewhere else and somehow is now at one of your students at Cornell? How do you deal with their parents who not only had those expectations, but rightly had those expectations because those parents have probably been incredibly involved. How do you deal with that?
Well, it sounds like they could only call once a week if they were at Linden Hill. So those Linden Hill former students, probably their parents have appropriate expectations. But parents who don't, we tell them there's something called FERPA, the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, which was originally enacted so that parents of kids below the age of 18 had access to their school records. But once kids hit the age of 18, then the student, him or herself, is the one who can grant access and who has access, and the parents don't have access. So we educate parents during orientation, during Parents' Weekend, about FERPA, and that we don't send grades home to parents. If parents are supporting the student financially, which most parents are, then the student can sign for them to have access. But we encourage parents to work through their student, to communicate with their student and have their student tell them what their grades are, how they're doing.
Fair enough.
I think the admission piece is the key. Setting the expectations right up front as you're partnering with a new family. I think that's exactly what we do, and just saying this is the way we do it. You're joining our community, and it doesn't mean we're inflexible if there's a situation that comes up that needs some flexibility. Right. But I think up front we are setting a contract with families, and that's exactly what I expected that you would be saying, that it's all about not surprising parents, even with the high expectations as they've been ratcheted up.
Well, you made the point about a contract. I mean, do you actually have a contract with your families?
Absolutely. Enrollment contracts, yes.
It's an actual enrollment contract, and it lays out the expectations and the communications?
Yes, it does.
Wow.
Now, the communication details? No, it doesn't, but it talks about a relationship we're going into, and it talks about how to comport ourselves and how to support one another.
How do you lay out the communication expectations?
We do that right away in the interview process, and then again, as the parents are there dropping their children off, I usually address everyone in the study hall, and I'm talking about what they can expect and what our promise is to you, and that's how we're going to keep you involved in this.
The other thing I would say is that we tell parents to encourage their college students to use the resources of the school. That, for example, a child who might have some learning differences they may need to talk to their professors, they may need to get extra time for tests, they may need to go to the writing center to have someone help them with their papers, but we tell parents right off the bat what the services are that we have, and that one of the big things they can do is encourage their children to use the services. So it's not like we're saying it's sink or swim for your child. We're saying we will provide a lot of support, but we want it to be developmentally appropriate.
But what if a student doesn't take advantage of that, and a mom or dad calls you and says, Johnny or Sally is not doing this? How do you handle that?
Yeah, we can't make the student take advantage of it. I formerly worked in career services, and we've had parents call and say, my child isn't doing anything about getting a job. Well, we can have them tell their child to come in and talk to us, and we will tell them all the resources that we have and all of our advice on how to do that. But if they won't come in, we can't make them come in.
But all of this comes down, at least in my mind, to how students and parents are relating to one another. Because it really depends on how students have been raised and how parents in a lot of ways have been raised and how they're raising their own kids. What's fair, what's reasonable, what's not, and how does one communicate back and forth? So I guess my question is if those communication patterns change over time, which we know that they do, and you have a certain expectation at Cornell or at Linden Hill, does that necessarily mean that the parent, who perhaps maybe is of a different generation, has the same expectations? And if not, How do you gently do that beyond the program that you just talked about before, Jim, in terms of inviting them through the interview? How do you do that?
I just think, to go back to one premise you started with, I'm not sure that our parents were raised the way they're raising their children. I really think there's quite a significant difference. One of the things I've struggled with at this age, I'm getting long in the tooth, I'm getting a little bit frustrated, I think, at points with some of the evolution of not letting these children fail, setting up situations. I wrote an article back in '92, and this is back in '92, about dropping the plow, where parents would just drop a plow and clear a way through a jungle for their children, having them not do any negotiating of any of the, challenges that they need to do to overcome, to become competent, confident adults. And so if you run into, to go back to your question, you run into a difference in philosophy, it could be at any point an evolution of a new problem or challenge for one of the students. I think it's all about quick, honest, direct communication that's centered around doing whatever is best for that child.
But do you think that men and women look at this differently? And maybe both of you can answer that.
I don't think it's in the genes, but I think...
But it's in the book.
Okay, but it's in the book. Right, very good.
Good plug, Steven.
I think mothers, one of the things that we know now from research is that college students have, and their parents have contact with each other 13 times a week on average. And we know that these parents did not grow up like that because it was impossible. My parents tried to call me, there were no answering machines, there might have been a phone down the hall. So what we do know is these 13 contacts a week on average are mostly with mothers, a little more they're initiated pretty equally by students and by the parent, but there's more contact with mothers than with fathers.
And do you find that in Linden Hill as well?
Yes, I think so. I don't want to make it certainly a blanket statement. There are many exceptions I can come up with, but by and large, there's more communication with the mother.
And what about grandparents? Have you found that there's, certainly in your neck of the woods in terms of the age group you're dealing with, are you finding that there are some communications with grandparents as well?
I love when grandparents come into interviews. We get sometimes the grandparents who are bringing their son or daughter and their grandchild in. It's fantastic. So yes, we have some communication with the age group's younger, so logically we're going to have more of them around, and it's always a real blessing again to be tighter with with more generations of a family. It really is a partnership.
We don't see grandparents until commencement.
Fair enough. In terms of teaching responsibility and maturity, we seem to be dancing around this a little bit. How do you do that? How do you teach responsibility and maturity? Well,
I think what we know from research is that parenting that does teach kids to be competent and mature and responsible typically has high expectations and high support. So I think you have high expectations, but you provide support to help the kid reach those expectations. So if you are not allowing the kid to suffer the consequences of a bad decision, or you are making the decision and managing their life, then you are not teaching that. So that's not what we mean by support. By support, we mean unconditional love. You will make mistakes. We will still love you when you make mistakes. But we expect you to behave in a developmentally appropriate way. And that's going to be different in middle school than it is in college. But here are expectations, and we will help you reach them.
Fair enough. Jim, do you have a thought on that?
Just with the small nature of the community and the strong emphasis on risk-taking that's built in, the boys come and again, they're making for the first time a school their own. They've usually been on the outside, pulled out for special classes, and this is their school. So we're really working on building up for them a series of planned events that they can succeed with. And we ratchet, again, that up over the course of the year. And that, by the end of the year, with them knowing that they're going to be expected to start and finish things, which is something new to them, and that they can fail, that's part of what we do as a school, and we role model it as adults.
And do students get homesick?
Yes. Yes, and parents get homesick.
For their students.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I mean, the stories of parents crying on the way home, and it's heart-wrenching. Crying, half of our interviews are tears. I have to have a box of tissues in the office in interviews.
We have
as
that.
Parents are making this decision.
We have that dialogue in the book, parents crying on the way home,
Yeah,
dropping off their kids.
It's very difficult.
I thought you were going to say you have a deal that if people buy 3 copies of your book, they get free tissues free or something like that.
No, we give free tissues. They don't have to buy the book.
Fair enough. So now at Cornell, these are issues obviously that affect people of lots of different ages. What about Cornell graduate students? Do you find that some of these issues are still affecting Cornell graduate students as well, who are of course a little older than Cornell undergraduates?
Right. I don't see that so much with graduate students. I work with a lot of graduate students who are teaching assistants for me, because I teach them large lecture classes, and they are, I mean, they're not always perfectly responsible, but I don't see the same issues with graduate students.
And you mentioned FERPA before.
Yes.
In my research, FERPA seems to have made a huge change in the last couple of years. Could you speak a little bit to that change? Because originally it was called the Buckley Amendment.
I remember that. Yes. The change, I think, in FERPA is that universities can contact parents. Like we at Cornell would share information with parents if we think a student is a danger to him or herself or to others. And actually one other area where we do share information is if a student is required to take a leave for academic reasons. We didn't share that information in the past, and we had an incident where parents were sending a kid money assuming he was in school, and he in fact had been required to take a leave. So now we send a letter saying your child has been required to take a leave. But I think schools are very open to parents if they can demonstrate they're financially supporting their student to sending grades, as long as their student signs for that to happen.
And Jim, on the middle school level, how do you deal with issues of confidentiality and issues of subtlety like that?
Well, it's very different because of the age. We're sharing everything directly with the parent. The only thing that would come into, I guess, this realm would be something shared with a counselor, and we have counselors who are working with our boys who actually come to our faculty meeting to help us in a general sense, keeping the patient therapist relationship intact. But those therapists are very often quite open with the boys' parents, and I think in the boys' best interest.
Fair enough. I think we're going to be out of time in a few minutes, but if I could ask each of you, maybe Jim, if you could start, is what advice would you have for students, middle school students and high school students of varying abilities, for a lot of our viewers who are watching this? And then Chrissy, maybe if you wouldn't mind commenting about that same question, but perhaps with students who are in college and graduate school.
Advice for the students?
Well, and advice for the parents who are dealing with some of the issues that we're talking about. They're students of many different ability levels, right? So what advice would you have for the parents who are kind of going through this and sorting through some of these issues?
Well, I think my advice would be to parents to be involved, to know what's going on, but to really partner with the institution. You made the choice to go to a school, whether it's college or it's secondary school or our school. And what the student needs to feel is a united front there. And if that's in place, the potential for success in so many different ways is heightened to such great levels. So the partnership, the openness, the expectations we're not going to change. They're greater, and we need to meet those expectations. So we're not shying away from that. Just work with us and communicate.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. If particularly for learning issues, we have student disability services, and I think most universities do. Student can produce psychological testing indicating that they need additional time on tests, whatever. It's the student's job to present that letter to the faculty member. So I would encourage the parents to work with the university, make sure their student is using all the resources.
Great advice. Thank you both. If you would like additional information about Don't Tell Me What to Do, Just Send Money, which is a great title, or about Linden Hill School, please visit search.barnesandnoble.com, Don't Tell Me What to Do, Just Send Money, or lindenhs.org. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.